This stock has consistent earnings, it has consistent sales, it has consistent revenue growth, and it's over $200 down from its 52-week high of over $700 per share. We'll talk about Adobe on today's show. What is going on, investors? Hopefully guys are doing well out there. Adobe reported their Q1 numbers, and we'll get into them here in a second. They had revenues coming in at $4.26 billion. That was 9% year over year. When we get over to the financials on this one, we'll show those $4.2 billion worth of revenue. We'll show you how mega high margins this company has, why we absolutely love this stock. Now, speaking of love, I actually recently purchased this stock, and you would have known it if you were subscribed to my newsletter, which is free, and the link is in the description below if you want to be a subscriber to my newsletter where I let you know the stocks I'm buying. I bought Adobe on February 18th for $445 per share. We'll talk about some of the reasons why I stepped in here and bought this one. Actually, a few things converge, a little bit of valuation, but also from a technical perspective, both of those things converge, and obviously the amazing fundamentals and the gross margins and the cash flows, which we'll talk about here in a second with Adobe. Now, during the regular session, Adobe was up quite a bit, up about 2.84%. A lot of stocks have just been making a really nice rally, especially over the last 5 days or so. Stocks up over 6%. In the after, I was trading down a little bit, but only by about $3, which I'm a little bit surprised by. I don't think investors are really too concerned about the 9% revenue growth. We talked about how they beat on that revenue side to $4.26 billion. They gave us guidance for the upcoming quarter, and then coming in at $4.34 billion, up fractionally quarter over quarter. Investors don't really aren't too concerned about that when it comes to Adobe, but the consensus estimate for the upcoming Q2 quarter was closer to $4.4 billion. So just off slightly. It could be that Adobe's coming underneath the consensus number only to likely meet it when they beat by, say, 10, 20, $30 million in the upcoming quarter. On the EPS side, or the earnings per share side, they're expected to earn about $3.30 versus a $3.35 gain, which Street was expecting for the upcoming quarter. We'll get into those Q1 numbers here in a moment, but I want to talk about sometimes as well from a valuation perspective. Obviously, we focus on the charts, we look at the price action, but the other thing you can do is also look at the multiple of the stock as well. I think one of the easiest ways to do it is here on Seeking Alpha. They don't pay me to say this, but over on the right-hand side of any stock page, there's this charting, and then you can come here and change things like price to sales, price to earnings. Typically, I'll look at price to sales, but in this case with Adobe, with such consistent earnings, we decided to look for price to earnings. This on a GAAP basis as well. They're trading right now, they say at a 45 times trailing 12-month PE. We see on a forward basis, they're closer to 32. Just keep those things in mind. It's not really the exact number that we're looking for when we look at stuff like this. We look where demand appears on this stock. And I've got a 5-year chart over at Adobe, and demand appears for this stock down here at about 40 times price to earnings on the trailing 12 months basis. It appeared back in 2018, appeared a little bit, didn't quite get there in 2020, but you also got back here in 2021. And here we are just a couple of weeks ago. The stock was down at that level that obviously converged a little bit from a technical perspective. We'll talk about those two things as well. Again, another reason why I bought this stock. I'm kind of, pumping my own book, so to speak, but it was only a small allocation of Adobe. We'll talk about more of that in a second. I want to jump into these Q1 numbers. We had that revenue coming in at $4.2 billion. Last year, you were at 3.9. Why we absolutely love this company. Do I love it as much as Microsoft? Do I love it as much as Apple? No, those are absolutely my favorite high margin tech plays, especially when we're talking about software and we're talking about Microsoft. But Adobe is right there when it comes to those gross margins, because off of this $4.2 billion, we had to just spend, and I say just $512 million. That's up fractionally from the previous period where you only had to spend $447 million. So you take this $4.2 billion, you minus 512, and you get your gross profit of $3.7 billion. It doesn't get any better than this. This is why investors are consistently willing to pay a premium for Adobe's earnings, because they are such high margin and they consistently grow that top line as well. Now, you have other operating expenses as well, right? R&D, selling and marketing, and general administrative, but look how well Adobe takes care of you. They only spent $2 billion last year on a quarterly basis. Now they spent just 2.17. So we grew our top line by about $360 million, grew our cost of those revenues revenues just fractionally, like $60–70 million, and then you grew your operating expenses by just about $170 million. So you take this 3,750, you minus off the 2.1 billion, you come down here to operating income, absolutely sensational, at $1.5 billion. So a $4.2 billion worth of revenue. All the way down to the operating side, you clear $1.5 billion. That's absolutely fantastic. $1.4 billion in the previous period. We'll show you what they've done with this cash, because we'll look at cash flows, and you can assume this company is like printing money when it comes to an operating perspective. So we'll talk about what they are doing with their cash. We see cash equivalents actually went down over the previous periods. In fact, it's went down aggressively just over the last 3 months or so. This is back in December, actually early December. So this is closer to about 4 months. Early December to March period is kind of what we're looking at, and we see the cash and cash equivalents went from over 5.7 down to about, we'll call it 4.7. So they actually burned through a fair amount of cash. You come down here to debt. This is the first thing that you look for, and you see that you went from 4.1 down to 3.6. But whenever you see debt on the long term goes down, you want to come up here to current liabilities and see if it just simply rolled over to there, and that's what we're actually seeing. 500 million of this debt, which is almost on the dot here, rolled over into the current liabilities. So that's not where this cash has come. So you flow all the way down to cash flows. You got a 3-month ended here on a cash flow statement, and you see here the net, they pull down a net income number of 1.26. Last year they're sitting basically about the same. That's after you pay taxes. Whenever I analyze a company, and you can do this however you wish, I tend to stop right here at operating income, okay? Because interest expense can go up and down, other income can go up and down. Obviously income taxes and the percentage that these companies pay can vary over time as well. I'm very, very focused on what we do from an operating perspective. But when you come all the way down to net income, this company printed 1.26 last year, basically flat from a rounding perspective. So you pull those numbers down, you come all the way down to net income after you pay taxes and everything else. And you come down here and you get to add back in things like stock-based compensation, depreciation, and amortization. Gives you a little bit better story about how cash is flowing through this company and any company that you're looking at. Adobe printed $1.77 billion worth of cash in the quarter, basically flat year over year as well. All things being considered, looking good from a cash flow perspective, although you'd like to see them probably increase here pretty soon. But what did the company do with the vast majority? We talked about how they burned through over $2 billion. You come down here, it's typically down here. They'll typically be repurchasing stock or doing some kind of buyback on the shares. When you see a company that's wildly profitable have their cash position go down, you see here it is down here in repurchase of common stock. And what most interesting is they really have done it over the last 3 months or so. When we come and look at this from a technical perspective, we see the stock has been on a straight arrow down over the last 3 months. So Adobe's kind of stepped in there. Now, from a technical perspective, I have this stretched out big time. I mean, we're going back 5, 6, 7 years now on Adobe, and I've identified that there's this longer term uptrend. And this is exactly why I bought this stock, okay? Because I already was familiar with these numbers. I'm already familiar with the high margins, the cash flows. This is why we consistently go over this stock here on the channel on a video basis. This is what you should be doing with your own stocks that you have in your own portfolio as well. You should be at least glancing at these numbers for 5 to 10 to 15 minutes anytime the company has earnings, so you're comfortable with what's going on here. Because I tell you what, if this revenue starts to decline or the margins start to take a hit, well, all of a sudden I might change my opinion about buying Adobe shares. But since we've already have that in our brain, we come over here from a technical perspective, and it looks like to me this stock just simply over the last few weeks or so just simply retested a much longer term trend line. That's why I stepped in here. I didn't get it at the dead lows. I'll have to come back here to my newsletter. I bought it at 445 or so. That was back up in February, sometime up in here. So I bought it kind of on the initial move down. Didn't quite get it at the bottom, but that's not the point. Now, in the shorter term, we are in a downtrend. Like a lot of stocks, these stocks have technically broken out from this downtrend, and it is satisfying to know that they're actually holding on to these gains and actually extending them. But I would actually expect Adobe, and in fact the vast majority of these stocks, to come back and retest, not necessarily retest the lows that this stock made. Certainly could potentially happen. With Adobe, it's closer to about $400 per share, but I think it's highly probable at some point Adobe starts to walk back to this longer term trend line. Now, depending on how long it takes to get there, the further up the trend line and the further up the price on the retest will be. But if it happens over the next couple of weeks, I think this stock could get back into the 420s, that could be your area where if you wanted to step in here and buy this stock, could be one of your first opportunities to do so. If the momentum just stays with Adobe, I do see an area of resistance we see back in 2020 and a little bit of 2021. The stock hit its head consistently on that $500 price range. And so that's only about $40 higher than where the stock is right now. Even if this bull run continues over the next coming days and weeks ahead in the stock market, I would expect Adobe to hit its head on that $500 level and then at least give you a little area where you could potentially buy this on a pullback. For Adobe to break over 500 would be an incredibly bullish move. And quite frankly, the entire stock market would likely be on a bull run at that point as well. I don't know the odds of that. I'm just glad I did step in on this one with a 1/5 position. I hear a lot in my comments and I see a lot in my comments, people talking about going all in a stock. I don't have necessarily a big problem with that. I just wouldn't do it all at once. In my case, I'd max out at about 10 shares of Adobe before it gets to too large of a position in my portfolio relation to other stocks that I like better than this stock, like a Microsoft, like a Google, like an Apple, like an Amazon. So in my case, when I said I bought Adobe, it was just a 1/5 position, just a handful of shares down at this 445 level. We'll see if we retest that level in the coming days and weeks ahead. Let me know down in the comments what you feel about Adobe's chances to continue to go up in the weeks ahead. Hopefully you guys had a great day out there. Good luck with your investments.